The announcement arrived without ceremony, a flat transmission stamped with the seal of the Galactic Coalition, and the word resettlement repeated until it lost all meaning. 2 million humans, displaced by wars they did not start, and treaties they were never invited to sign, were being relocated to Mars. The Coalition called it mercy. The refugees called it a death sentence long before the transports finished docking. Commander Elias Rowan stood on the observation deck as the last carrier slid away from orbit, its engines flaring bright and indifferent against the red curve below. He had worn this uniform in real battles, had watched fleets burn and worlds fracture, but nothing felt as final as the quiet after abandonment. Mars lay beneath them, cold, thin-aired, and officially classified as non-viable. The Coalition's generosity ended at the edge of the planet's gravity well. Behind him, the deck filled with restless motion. Engineers argued over power allocations that did not exist. Medics counted supplies already measured in hours. Elias turned as Dr. Marcus Hale entered, his expression set in that sharp, focused way that meant he had already run the numbers and disliked the outcome. Hale was a systems engineer by training, a theorist by reputation, and a liability by Coalition standards. That was why he was here. They left early, Hale said, unnecessary words for an obvious truth. We were promised 3 more supply drops. Elias nodded. Promises are cheap when you don't plan to come back. Hale glanced at the shrinking stars beyond the glass. Then we're on our own. They had known that part already, even before landing. What unsettled Elias was how calm Hale sounded, as if independence were not a curse, but an equation waiting to be solved. The first reports from the surface arrived within the hour. The primary domes were operational but aging, their seals designed for research crews, not millions. Oxygen recycling lagged under the sudden demand. Water reserves, locked beneath layers of ice and regolith, required power they could barely generate. Mars resisted them with silent patience. Jonah Kade pushed his way onto the deck, grease-stained and breathless, a man more comfortable in motion than waiting. He had made a career out of logistics in collapsing war zones, finding order in chaos and supplies where others saw ruin. We've inventoried everything, he said. And I mean everything. Broken drones, half-dead reactors, abandoned Coalition equipment they forgot to classify as useful. And, Elias asked, and if we're careful, we last maybe 3 weeks. 3 weeks. Elias felt the number settle like dust in his lungs. He had been appointed civil coordinator in name, a convenient figurehead to soothe the refugees during transit. Now the title carried weight. 2 million lives were balanced on a margin thinner than Mars's atmosphere. Father Tomas Reed approached more quietly, his long coat marked with the red grit of the surface. He had no official role beyond cultural support, a label the Coalition used when it did not understand why humans needed something. Reed had spent the landing hours moving through the crowds, listening more than speaking. They're scared, he said simply. But they're watching you. Elias met his gaze. Reed never dramatized. If he said something mattered, it did. Then they'll see what we do next. The first assembly filled the central dome to capacity, bodies packed shoulder to shoulder beneath a ceiling of reinforced glass. Beyond it, the sky was a dull rust color, lifeless and vast. Elias stood on a raised platform, the murmur of voices fading as his image projected across the dome. He did not waste time with reassurances that would collapse under scrutiny. The Coalition sent us here to be managed out of existence, he said. They chose Mars because it's hard, because it's far, and because they assumed we would fail quietly. Anger rippled through the crowd, sharp and immediate. They were wrong, Elias continued. But being right won't keep us alive. Action will. He laid out the facts with brutal clarity. Limited time, limited resources, no rescue. There were no speeches about destiny, no appeals to faith alone. He spoke of work, of coordination, of risk. He spoke of choice. When he finished, the dome was silent, not with despair, but with the stillness of people deciding whether to stand or collapse. They stood. The days that followed blurred into relentless motion. Teams formed and reformed, driven by necessity rather than hierarchy. Hale vanished into the data streams, mapping pressure curves and energy flows. Jonah led scavenging runs to derelict mining sites beyond the domes, dragging back machinery the Coalition had deemed obsolete. Reed kept a record, not of failures but of names, insisting that survival meant remembering who they were. On the fourth night, Hale requested a private meeting. He spread holographic projections across the command table, atmospheric models, thermal gradients, power outputs spiking into the red. Elias recognized the shapes of forbidden calculations. "This isn't approved," Elias said, though approval had lost its relevance. "No," Hale replied. "It's possible." He explained quickly, words precise and urgent. Fusion overdrives pushed past safety margins. Volcanic vents tapped without gradual conditioning. Atmospheric thickening accelerated to a pace the Coalition had classified as reckless. It would be dangerous. It would be irreversible. It could kill us faster, Elias said. It could also give us a planet, Hale answered. Mars doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to breathe. Elias studied the projections, then the man who had drawn them. Hale was not reckless by nature. If he was willing to gamble this much, it meant the alternative was worse. Outside the dome, a thin wind swept across the regolith, lifting red dust into the air. Mars watched them without malice, without mercy. Elias closed the projection and looked at Hale. "Start preparing," he said, quietly. As Hale left, Elias turned back to the glass. The planet below was still hostile, still indifferent, but for the first time since landing, it felt less like a grave and more like a challenge. The Coalition believed they had solved the human problem by exile. They were about to learn that humans did not disappear so easily. The first sunrise on Mars was faint, a washed-out orange smear over jagged horizons, but for the humans within the domes, it carried the weight of necessity. Elias Rowan stood at the entrance of the central command dome, watching the shadows crawl across frozen terrain. Day 1 of the emergency protocol had begun. There would be no reprieve, no luxury of gradual adjustment. Mars would test them and they would answer in kind. Hale had already begun rerouting power to the fusion overdrives, the hum of machinery threading through the metal corridors. "We need stable oxygen output before the end of this rotation," he said without looking up. His hands flew over the controls, recalculating pressure curves and thermal gradients like a pianist running scales. There was no fear in his voice, only calculation, as if panic could be solved with the right numbers. Jonah Kade emerged from the maintenance tunnels, boots scuffing dust, a crate of salvaged drones clutched under one arm. "Salvage team reports usable units in the old mining shafts," he said. "We can rig transport routes, but we'll lose at least one drone per trip. Radiation spikes and dust interference are worse than expected." Elias nodded. "Then we adapt. We don't have the option to wait for perfect conditions." He paused, surveying the crowd of engineers and volunteers gathered around the command table. Each face carried exhaustion, skepticism, and, beneath it all, a spark of defiance. "We do what humans always do, turn scarcity into opportunity." Outside, the first teams of laborers moved in coordinated lines, drills piercing the frozen regolith in search of ice deposits. Water extraction would be the lifeline, and Jonah's teams worked like shadows, hauling equipment across miles of barren rock. Dust storms roared across the plains, but no storm could drown determination. Marcus Hale monitored the readouts with sharp eyes, recalibrating output as he shouted orders over comm channels. Father Tomas Reed walked among the volunteers, gently correcting mistakes, offering guidance that was as practical as it was moral. "You'll tire, but do not falter," he said to a group shivering beneath a thin thermal layer. "Mars does not forgive sloth, but it will reward effort." His voice was low yet firm, carrying the weight of someone who had seen humanity endure worse. The men nodded, feeding their energy into the drills and transport lines. By the third day, small successes emerged. Oxygen levels crept upward, barely measurable but tangible, while ice extraction began yielding water sufficient for immediate consumption. Marcus Hale was ecstatic in his precise, unemotional way. At this rate, we stabilized pressure within 7 rotations, he announced to Elias, who allowed himself a brief nod of approval. But success carried cost. Jonah returned from a run to a derelict mining site with a crushed drone and a broken transport module. We lost half the gear to unstable terrain, he reported. Radiation exposure spiked. If we continue at this pace, more will fail. He didn't complain. Failure was data, and data required adaptation. Elias's voice cut across the table. Then we adjust. Every failure is a lesson. Every risk calculated is a life extended. He felt the weight of their collective gaze and continued. We have 3 weeks to turn this planet into a home, or we bury ourselves beneath it. No one else will intervene. Not the coalition. Not the galaxy. Us only. The refugees began to organize themselves into specialized units, forming clear chains of responsibility. Teams for atmospheric regulation, water extraction, and equipment salvage became second nature. Even the least capable adapted. Human efficiency grew like an organism under stress, with Elias and Hale as its heartbeat and brain, Jonah as its muscle, and Reed as its conscience. By day 5, Hale proposed a daring step. We can increase atmospheric compression using the fusion overdrives directly, he said. It risks structural collapse in the domes and potential lethal radiation spikes, but it could accelerate breathable oxygen levels significantly. Elias weighed the proposal silently. Risk was not theoretical here, it was imminent, unavoidable. Do it, he said finally, but stagger the output. Monitor every reaction. Lives depend on our precision. Hale nodded, fingers already dancing over controls, recalibrating outputs with surgical accuracy. That night, dust swirled violently outside. Inside the domes, the humans worked through exhaustion, monitoring reactors, repairing equipment, and rationing resources. The planet seemed intent on crushing their ambition with every gust, every tremor, every momentary power failure. Yet in those corridors of sweat and steel, determination burned brighter than any storm. On day 7, the first real breakthrough arrived. Atmospheric pressure stabilized just enough for controlled excursions outside sealed suits. Small groups, led by Jonah and accompanied by Hale's monitoring drones, stepped onto Martian soil, helmeted heads lifting toward a sky that was beginning to hint at change. The air was thin, bitterly cold, but it carried the faintest whisper of possibility. Elias watched from the command dome as men planted sensors and flags across the red landscape. We're not asking permission, he said to no one in particular, echoing a thought that had taken root in every mind in the dome. We're claiming what should have been ours. Father Reed joined him, silent at first, then murmured, They'll remember this. Not the fear, not the hardship, but that we stood. And for the first time since the landers touched down, the domes felt less like cages and more like crucibles. 2 million humans, left to the mercy of a hostile world, were beginning to defy the fate the galaxy had assigned them. The dust swirled, the domes groaned under stress, and Mars, ancient and indifferent, seemed to watch with quiet amusement. Elias allowed himself a brief smile. They had survived week 1. The planet had tested them, and for the first time, they had answered. But Mars would not relent, and the true challenges had only just begun. The countdown to transformation had begun, and every human within the domes knew it. Survival was no longer enough. They were building something far greater than endurance. They were shaping a home in defiance of the cosmos itself. The air in the domes had changed, or at least the sensors said it had. By day 8, the oxygen content crept higher, a fraction of a percent at a time, yet enough to ignite hope. Humans walked shorter distances without immediate exhaustion. The hum of machinery no longer seemed merely survival noise, but the rhythm of progress. Outside, the Martian wind still howled, sand swirling like a living thing across the ochre plains, yet it no longer felt entirely hostile. Elias Rowan surveyed the data with the same careful detachment he had maintained since landing. Numbers did not lie, but they did require interpretation. Hale, eyes glued to the holographic readouts, was already recalculating. looking for ways to accelerate progress without collapsing the domes or incinerating the teams outside. His mind moved faster than the planet's storms, and Elias depended on that velocity. Jonah Kade returned from an extended survey of a volcanic ridge, his face streaked with dust, eyes bright beneath the protective visor. "We found geothermal vents intact, some heat flow higher than predicted. Could be leveraged to stabilize atmospheric processors," he reported. Elias nodded, already running mental schematics of integrating natural heat with artificial fusion output. Every resource, every anomaly on Mars could be converted into survival if applied with ingenuity. The first dust ion storm arrived on day 10, a rolling wall of sand and static that shattered communication for hours and tore at poorly anchored equipment. Jonah's salvage teams huddled inside makeshift shelters, watching drones struggle against the wind before disappearing into the haze. Hale's fusion overdrive shuddered, their readings spiking unpredictably. "If the shielding fails," Hale said, voice tight, "the domes could collapse entirely." Elias did not flinch. "Then we hold it together. We do not retreat. Not now, not ever." His words carried, not as encouragement, but as command. Every man in the dome understood that failure was no longer an option. Their survival and the future of 2 million refugees depended on total commitment. By day 12, small victories began to accumulate. Atmospheric processors, bolstered by geothermal integration, produced breathable oxygen more efficiently. Sensors outside the domes recorded the faintest streaks of green along isolated ice deposits, algae engineered by Hale to survive Martian conditions. For the first time, there was a visible proof of human intervention shaping the planet. The coalition, monitoring from orbit, began raising alarms. Their messages were terse, clipped, and threatening: cease all unauthorized terraforming, or face immediate intervention. Elias ignored them, responding only in private communiques to his officers. "We will not negotiate survival." Hale nodded at him during one briefing, eyes glinting. "Let them see what humans are capable of. Numbers and rules don't contain us." Meanwhile, Father Reed moved among the workers and volunteers, recording events, noting sacrifices. Jonah's teams had already lost 3 men to radiation exposure and falling debris during reconnaissance of the volcanic ridge. Reed spoke at briefings without dramatics. "These are not losses," he said calmly. "They are investments in a future that will remember every effort. Remembering sustains life where fear cannot." His words grounded the men, offering moral ballast amid chaos. By day 15, progress became visible beyond the domes. Humans could venture further outside, wearing reinforced suits and partial filters, placing sensors and modular greenhouses in protected valleys. Hale coordinated remotely, adjusting output in real time to prevent overpressure, while Jonah mapped new zones for expansion. The alien landscape began to show signs of change: reddish soil streaked with dark green algae, the first whispers of liquid flow where ice had melted. Elias walked among the teams, noting determination etched on each face. "Mars is not waiting for us," he reminded them, "and neither are we waiting for permission. Every meter you reclaim is proof that humanity cannot be erased." His words were simple but precise, a strategy in rhetoric as much as in morale. But the planet was not entirely cooperative. On day 16, a structural alert sounded through the command dome. A partial collapse of one external habitat module had occurred due to a sudden microquake triggered by geothermal manipulation. Jonah rushed outside, assessing the damage, while Hale recalculated energy output to prevent further destabilization. Elias stood in the control room, silently weighing options: pull back and risk delay, or push forward and risk catastrophe. He chose to push. Secure the perimeter. Reinforce the modules. Continue extraction. Risk had always been the currency of survival. They had none left to squander. By day 17, a breakthrough occurred. The integration of geothermal heat and fusion overdrive had raised oxygen levels to the point where small, unassisted outdoor excursions could last minutes, without incident. Men moved with growing confidence, erecting modular domes and experimental greenhouses, planting hardy crops and initiating water recycling circuits directly into soil plots. Reed documented every success and failure, noting that morale was increasing alongside atmospheric stability. The Coalition inspection fleet, previously indifferent, arrived on schedule. Sleek observation vessels hung in orbit, eyes trained on the domes and human activity below. But the inspectors were unprepared for what they saw. Patches of green across the red landscape, humans moving purposefully outside sealed structures, technology repurposed in ways their reports had deemed impossible. Elias watched the fleet from the central dome, a faint smile crossing his face. "Let them come," he said. "Let them see what they underestimated. Mars isn't ours yet, but it will be." Hale joined him, fingers brushing over the holographic display of the planet. "They think it's statistical anomaly," he said. "They think the numbers will regress. They'll be wrong." Jonah returned from outside, wiping dust from his visor. "We're not just surviving," he said. "We're shaping a home." Elias looked toward the horizon, where the faintest streaks of green met rust-colored dunes. He felt the weight of 2 million lives pressing on him, yet also the surge of human potential, unbounded by rules and cruelty. The planet was responding, slowly but unmistakably, to human ingenuity and resolve. Father Reed joined him, silent for a moment, then offered the observation only someone who had witnessed history could make. "Mars is beginning to breathe," he said softly. "And we are its first heartbeat." The domes hummed, machinery thrummed, and humans labored into the Martian night. 2 million voices had begun as whispers of defiance. Now they formed the steady rhythm of creation. The planet remained indifferent. Storms still roared, and the Coalition watchers in orbit grumbled at anomaly reports. But inside the domes, among humans who refused to vanish, a revolution in survival had begun. Mars was awakening under their hands, and the galaxy would have no choice but to acknowledge it. Day 17 ended with the first unassisted human steps on partially stabilized soil. The horizon seemed different, less menacing. Mars, long considered a grave, had begun to answer the question humans had always asked: what if we refused to be forgotten? The planet was still far from home, still unforgiving, but the first seeds of defiance had taken root. Humanity had made the impossible tangible. The 24th day on Mars began with a pale, fragile light spilling over jagged horizons. The sky was still a muted ochre, but for the first time it carried something human hands had coaxed from the atmosphere: possibility. Elias Rowan surveyed the domes, their patched seams and reinforced glass glinting in that fragile dawn. 24 days ago, this planet had been a prison. Today it felt like a proving ground. Marcus Hale's fingers flew over the fusion overdrives, monitoring output and adjusting geothermal integration. "We're approaching core resonance thresholds," he said, voice tight with controlled excitement. "If we push slightly further, we can stabilize a partial magnetic field. Radiation drops could be measurable within the next rotation." Elias nodded, understanding the stakes. The Coalition had warned them repeatedly: continue unauthorized terraforming and face orbital strikes. Now that threat loomed, but the humans on Mars had grown bolder with every calculated risk. Survival was no longer enough. They were claiming more than life. They were asserting sovereignty. Jonah Kade emerged from a distant greenhouse valley, dust streaking his sweat-streaked face. "Crops are holding. First sprouts under artificial sunlight look viable for trial harvests. We can expand if we secure additional water flow from the ice beds." He carried small containers of nutrient-rich algae, engineered to thrive in Martian soil, the green inside stark against the red landscape. Father Tomas Reed walked among the labor teams, clipboard in hand. He had stopped merely recording and begun advising, bridging science and morale. "Each seed you plant, each meter you reclaim, matters," he said to a group of exhausted men adjusting protective barriers. "This is proof that humans can impose life where none was meant to exist." The first Martian rain fell on day 24, thin and acidic, but undeniable. Water droplets hissed against protective surfaces, dissolving dust into rivulets that traced chaotic patterns across the domes and valleys. Elias watched from the command center as men in reinforced suits collected samples and tested pH levels. The sound of liquid on Mars was a song of defiance, proof that persistence could coax a planet into cooperation. Hale adjusted the fusion overdrives, pushing the magnetic field just beyond safe operational parameters.
"This is it," he said.
Core resonance is holding. Shielding at 30% of Earth baseline. Radiation drops measurable. We can push survival beyond previous limits. Elias turned to Jonah. Prepare outdoor teams. Begin unassisted exposure tests in controlled zones. Monitor, record, and adapt. We are not merely surviving anymore. We are living. Jonah's teams deployed immediately, moving cautiously across valleys where green patches met red dunes. Small domes were erected to shield crops, while portable atmospheric monitors measured oxygen and pressure levels. Men removed helmets briefly, stepping into thin air while carefully monitoring vitals. Every success was a step closer to home, every second of survival an act of rebellion against exile. The coalition responded with impatience, dispatching an inspection fleet in orbit. Sleek vessels hovered above, lights cutting through the thin atmosphere, sensors trained on the domes and human activity below. Coalition messages were clipped and threatening. Cease all terraforming, or sanctions will be enacted. Elias ignored the messages, focusing on the planet beneath his feet. Hale spoke softly, almost to himself. They don't understand what they've underestimated. Mars is adapting, algae thriving, water cycling, magnetic stabilization. If they intervene, they'll interfere with the planet in transition. Elias placed a hand on Hale's shoulder. Let them watch. Let the galaxies see that humans do not obey death sentences. The next hours were a symphony of coordinated labor. Jonah's teams expanded greenhouses into protective valleys, planting additional crops and connecting water channels. Hale fine-tuned atmospheric processors, stabilizing pressure while keeping oxygen levels climbing. Reed moved through each area, offering guidance and recording progress, ensuring no contribution went unnoticed. By day 25, the climax of human ingenuity was undeniable. Small pockets of breathable air allowed brief, unassisted outdoor activity. Crops stood resilient under artificial light, and the magnetic shielding from core resonance had reduced radiation to survivable levels. The planet, once a barren grave, now bore faint signs of life. The green streaks of engineered algae, the subtle shimmer of collected water, the first experimental rainfall. Elias activated the central communications array and broadcast across all frequencies, a message to the galaxy and to the coalition observers above. You sent us here to disappear. We were expected to fail quietly, to vanish without record. We have not only survived, we have claimed this world. Mars is no longer a grave. It is proof that humanity cannot be erased. The domes were silent as every man absorbed the weight of his words. 2 million lives hung in balance, yet in that silence, hope resonated. Fathers, engineers, scientists, and laborers alike realized that the impossible had been achieved not by technology alone, but by human will. Jonah emerged from a greenhouse, watching children play in controlled spaces, their laughter unrestrained despite helmets and suits. We're home, he said quietly, almost in disbelief. Reed nodded, watching the new sprouts sway under artificial wind generators. And they will remember. Humanity's defiance is etched into this soil. Hale adjusted the final overdrive, the magnetic field shimmering faintly across the planet. Radiation levels now sustainable. Oxygen breathable for extended exposure. Mars is alive because we made it so. Elias stood on the observation platform, looking over the valleys, the domes, and the first hints of a Martian skyline tinged with green. For 25 days, they had been abandoned, underestimated, and left to die. And yet here they were alive, victorious and unbroken. Mars was no longer a punishment. It was a testament. The inspection fleet hovered silently, forced witnesses to human resilience. The galaxy could no longer classify Mars as a dumping ground. It had become a sovereign world, forged in human hands and human will. Elias turned to his team. "Hale, Jonah, Reed. This is only the beginning," he said. "We did not just survive. We claimed the impossible. And now, the universe will remember us." Above the red horizon, the faintest blue hue began to stretch across the sky, a promise that life, nurtured by defiance and determination, could endure anywhere. Children ran across the valley floors, men and women tending the first crops, while the domes shimmered like beacons of human ingenuity. Mars had been designed as a tomb. Humans had turned it